Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for holding this hearing. And as we look at the last administration and the abuses at the Department of Justice, it's clear that we had a president and a department that rewarded the president's friends, reducing the sentences or issuing pardons for Paul Manafort, Roger Stone, Michael Flynn, and then punished and weaponized the department to go after the president's enemies. And I guess I'll start with Ms. Oberlander. If you would engage me on this, would you agree that presidents set the tone for a country, that how a president engages, whether they're a bully or they're compassionate or they're a leader, has a real effect on just how everyday Americans can carry themselves?
I would, and I do think that the attacks on the media of the last administration has had a profound and negative effect on how the media is perceived by all of Americans. I think the cries of fake news and the specific attacks on particular journalists has really undermined and worked to really injure the standing of the press.
Ms. Oberlander, you're correct, and we've seen at the Trump rallies the attacks on the media. We've seen across the country attacks and violence against journalists. And you did not know my questions ahead of time, and Mr. Chairman, this is not an advertisement for my violence against journalism bill. But Ms. Oberlander, my concern, aside from what Donald Trump and the department did, because I have faith that Merrick Garland is going to get to the bottom of this and that in Congress we will understand exactly who was responsible. To kind of extrapolate what you were saying, the Department of Justice is not the only law enforcement agency in America. Is that right?
I think that's correct, yes.
In every state, you have a state attorney general and, of course, county and municipal law enforcement.
Yes, you do.
Do you fear that if you have a president who detests accountability and was willing to weaponize his own law enforcement agency against his enemies, that could have the effect, just as we mentioned earlier, with presidents setting the tone, of governors and mayors seeing it as a permission slip to weaponize local law enforcement? I
think, well, I do want to say that the subpoenas to the media have been going on across. This is not a partisan issue. I mean, we did see that President Obama issued a number of. There were more leak investigations than there had ever been, and that's we've had a growth of that. So it's not purely a political issue, but yes, the attacks on the media have had an effect both federally and at local and state jurisdictions. And if you look at there's been a lot of video of how media, who were labeled media, press, et cetera, were treated and injured during some of the protests last summer. It does feel that in some cases they were singled out because they were press.
And to distinguish, because I agree with you, it was wrong that the Obama administration allowed that, but would you agree that while that was an aggressive pursuit of leaks, the difference between what we have seen or suspect with the Trump administration is that it was a punitive use of power, meaning it was the motivation was to go after perceived enemies, whereas on the Obama administration side, it seemed it was an aggressive use of law enforcement. Wrong, but I think there is a distinction.
There's absolutely a distinction between the way the administrations operate. I wouldn't want to characterize, one motive or the other on that front. But I will say that there has been during the Trump administration, we believe that there have been twice as many leak investigations opened up as there were in the prior administration.
And Ms. Oberlander, I don't want anyone to walk away from this hearing believing that members of Congress think that they are above the law. If a member of Congress commits a crime or if there's probable cause for a search warrant, he or she should have their records subpoenaed or their property searched and seized. But what can we do, aside from additional protections for journalists, what can we do for non-journalists as far as additional protections?
So, and I completely agree, and I will say that even, you know, the SHIELD laws that we've looked at, and also all of the Attorney General guidelines, I do want to point out that if a journalist is suspected of committing a crime not related to news gathering, that the crime is not itself growing out of the news gathering, then none of these protections apply. The government can come after and look for their materials and see if so there has always been an exception, the carve out for crimes that have nothing to do with news gathering in all of that. But I do think that for everyone, I do think there should be, at the very, very least, and this applies to members of Congress, a duty of candor on the part of the department that anytime they are looking for materials from a congressperson or their staffs or their family, and they know whose materials they're looking for, they need to tell the third-party provider, the service provider, of whose information it is. Apple has said that they had no way to identify, essentially, that they didn't know that this was congressional staff and families. So I think there should be a legislative obligation to disclose, you know, what they know and why they're looking for it, and then in the limited, very limited places where there is no notice given, the service provider will be able to make a determination of whether that's something that they should be objecting to or not.
Great.
The gentleman's time is expired.